السلام عليكم.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه. اللهم زد صلاة وتسليما على الحبيب المصطفى النبي الأمين خاتم الرسل والأنبياء أجمعين، المرسل رحمة للعالمين، وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين، وعلى صحبه المختارين، وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم يا علي يا عظيم، اللهم اصلح لنا ديننا الذي هو عصمة أمرنا، واصلح لنا دنيانا التي فيها معاشنا، واصلح لنا آخرتنا التي فيها معادنا، واجعل الحياة زيادة لنا في كل خير، واجعل الموت راحة لنا من كل شر. Five years ago, we started the Usuli Institute. The idea, the inspiration, was something, an institutional format, to go back and reclaim the foundations of our faith and the Islamic message. And although when the Usuli Institute was founded, at the time, I did not know that I would be sharing my journey with the Quran. But as Allah willed and as Allah arranged, it has become a crowning activity of the Usuli Institute, is for me to share my lifelong journey with Allah's divine book and divine inspiration. And those who have been following us know that in what we have called the Illum Project, from Illuminate and the illuminations of the divine, that we have reached the gates of Surah Al-Maidah. The last major surah to be revealed shortly before the death of the Prophet ﷺ, in the 10th Hijrah year. And subhanallah, so much dwells in my heart as we stand at the gate of sharing, at least sharing my personal journey with Surah Al-Maidah. The last great revelation, Allah's final testament to us. You see, at the end of Surah Al-Maidah, after Allah shares with us a warning message, a message of those who receive Allah's message, a message about those who receive Allah's message, but then take it for granted, and then take Allah for granted, and fail to live up to the demands of their covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah warns us about the consequences of this covenantal failure. And part of the covenantal failure that Allah warns us about is when brother turns against brother and brother murders brother. But the issue is not simply that a brother has killed a brother. The issue is not simply that Habil have killed Qabil. But it is the selfishness and the egoism of a brother when dealing with a fellow brother. A brother who forgets that they are bound by the covenant of values and virtues and succumbs to the temptations of the ego. And when they succumb to the temptation of the ego, what matters are not principles of justice and righteousness, but what matters is simply what I believe I am entitled to. The supremacy, the sovereignty of the ego. And Allah warns us that breaching this covenant in this way, in an allegory communicated to us, leads to 40 years of being lost on the face of this earth, wandering without the anchor of a home, without the anchor of principles, without the anchor of a real relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If our ancestors, the Israelites, were lost in the desert for 40 years, well, how about those who come later? You see, there is a warning in Surah Al-Maidah that is quite amazing. Allah tells us at the end of Surah Al-Maidah about the disciples of Jesus who urged Jesus to ask God to send a repast, or a repast meaning a meal or a feast. They receive the feast sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is a physical feast. And Allah warns those who receive the feast that after having now received this blessing, you are on notice. If you stray from the path, the consequences will be a great torment. Our minds are accustomed to thinking of the great torment as something that happens in the hereafter. But the great torment could be like the 40 years of wandering, which for a people with a different feast and a different legacy could be, instead of 40 years, could be 400 years of being lost and wandering. The disciples of Jesus received a repast, a feast that they can celebrate the memory for generations to come. But Surah Al-Maidah is begging you to think about the repast received by Muslims. In the past, Allah communicated with human beings through miracles, making magical things happen. But Muslims, who are supposed to be the recipients of the final covenant and the final message, their Maidah, their repast, their feast is not food. It's food of a different kind. It is the legacy of the Quran and the moral teachings of their Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. This is our repast. This is our Maidah. This is what Allah entrusted us with. And this is what, if we betray, if we breach, could lead to a torment like no other. Surah Al-Maidah starts with the idea of a covenant. Allah simply declares at the beginning, people, don't violate your covenants. So many Muslim scholars commenting on the beginning of Surah Al-Maidah said, in truth, there are three presumptive covenants. The covenant that a human being has with their Lord, a contract, the predecessor, and in fact the inspiration for Rousseau's social contract and Locke's social contract. The first contract is between a human being and their Lord. The second contract is between a human being and themselves. And the third contract is between a human being and all other human beings. An implied contract that you, the minute you come to existence, you have a contract with your Lord, you have a contract with the self, and you have a contract with all other human beings. A presumptive contract that you discharge the obligations of the covenants that bind and define your existence. For the Muslim Ummah, they received the greatest of all repasts, the greatest of all meals, or gifts, or legacies. The disciples of Jesus received food to be consumed, but the disciples of Muhammad received the Quran. That remarkable feast of morality. It is no coincidence that in Surah Al-Maidah, Allah reminds us that core to our covenant and core to the repast that we inherited is that we remain forever people who bear witness as to justice for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The covenant demands that we in truth become the embodiment of divinity and the values and virtues of divinity on earth. But what happens when those who are blessed with a covenant act in ways that is unbecoming of their covenant, unbecoming of who they are, unbecoming of the obligations and duties and rights they owe vis-a-vis other human beings? Well, Allah in Surah Al-Maidah tells us, you are left to deteriorate and degrade morally and ethically till you become effectively like apes in the wild or swine roaming the prairies, consuming, feeding, playing, but no purpose, no beauty, no morality, no virtue. You become as if القردة والخنازير. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. اسألوا الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة والتسليم على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Hardly a week passes without a stark reminder as to how current Muslims understand the repast that they inherited from their Prophet alayhi afdal salatu wa taslim. And the reminders are always painful. Just recently, a friend sent me a clip of a conversation of someone who is amazingly, astoundingly, has a following among us Muslims, and even amazingly was praised by some Muslims. Jordan Peterson, in a conversation with Netanyahu, and in this conversation, Jordan Peterson is engaging in the most classic representation of racist, fascist colonialism. He talks to Netanyahu about how Palestine was barren lands, empty lands. He talks with Netanyahu about how for 2,000 years, Arabs, Muslims, Palestinians, whatever designation you want to give, did nothing with this land. So the Israelis came and made the desert bloom. And Jordan Peterson contributes a highly flawed understanding of the common law, a messed up representation of the idea of adverse possession. But he's an ignorant man for ignorant people. And so he says, well, isn't it the case in the common law that if you come to a barren land, although if it's owned by someone, and you turn it from a wasteland to a productive land, then you've gained title to this land. And Netanyahu, of course, jumps on the bandwagon and says, yes, this is originally our land, and these Arabs, Muslims, Palestinians, for 2,000 years did nothing with it. It was completely a waste. And we made the desert bloom, and Jordan Peterson happily validates and approves of all of this. Those who have a minimal amount of education, and even the most primitive level of moral consciousness, know that this is the classic narrative of racist settler colonialism. We discovered lands, we found primitive people. The primitive people, although existing for this land for hundreds of years, their values, their languages, their social life doesn't matter. It's all backwards and reactionary. So we obliterated them and replaced them with what matters. Well, Jordan Peterson is another racist, fascist voice for typical racist, fascist settler colonialism. And it wouldn't matter but for the fact that Jordan Peterson has been validated by numerous individuals who call themselves Muslims. But for the fact that Jordan Peterson boasts that he has a following among Muslims, but for the fact that there are people like Hamza Yusuf who turned Jordan Peterson into a respected voice, among Muslims. I want to tell you something that should be obvious, so painfully obvious. Islamophobia is exploding everywhere. An article about Islamophobia in German schools, an article about how banking systems discriminate against Muslims and discriminate against non-profit Muslim organizations, and how the law helps structural racism and structural Islamophobia. An event that has Islamophobic messages that is seen traveling from one Islamic center to another in New Jersey, I hardly need to cite evidence of the extent to which Islamophobia is exploding on the scene. But the nature of dominance, the nature of hegemonic colonialism, the nature of the racist settler enterprise in modern history thrived on Muslim ignorance, Muslim insularity. But for the heedlessness, the naivety, the innocence of natives in lands that were colonized, the colonizer would not have been able to colonize those who are colonized. The problem is, it seems that we've learned nothing from colonialism. Exactly like when Napoleon first started colonizing Muslim lands in order to appease the ignorant Muslim masses. All Napoleon needed to do was to say a few words praising the Prophet or pretending to honor and respect Islam, as Napoleon proceeded to slaughter and kill numerous Muslims. At the same time that Napoleon bombarded the Azhar University, razing it to the ground, killing 800 Muslim shuyukh, at the same time, Napoleon praised Muslims for fasting and ordered his soldiers not to drink and eat in public during Ramadan. And for these ignorant, stupid Muslim masses, the type who are impressed by a Jordan Peterson, the type who cannot see the colonial project for what it is, there were those who said, oh, well, yeah, it's true Napoleon bombarded Al-Azhar. True, Napoleon has slaughtered hundreds and thousands of Muslims. But hey, look, he cares about Islam. After all, he told his soldiers to respect the rules of Ramadan. The entire colonial project thrives on the intellectual ineptness of Muslims. It is remarkable. The same type of people that create a ministry of tolerance. Ministry of tolerance. And then sit there pretending to be an interracial hub of tolerance and humanity are the same people who warmly received and entertained forgot his name for a second. Yeah, Itmar bin Gavir. Someone like Itmar bin Gavir Itmar bin Gavir, who is part of the incoming Netanyahu government, a government that we are told by some Muslims, oh, if they seek peace, seek it as well, was even convicted in Israel of incitement to racism and supporting a terrorist organization. This man who was convicted in Israel because of his rabid racism and Islamophobia is going to be the national security minister in the new Israeli government. This man was warmly received and praised by the United Arab Emirates, the same country that supports the Islam of bin Bayya, the Islam of bin Bayya that tells you it doesn't matter that Israel has killed more Palestinians. The number of Palestinians that Israel has killed is the highest since 2005. That tells you the fact that Israel just killed, just yesterday, 3 more Palestinians. Doesn't matter. That Israel has stolen and usurped and annexed the Aqsa Mosque. Doesn't matter. That Israel appoints someone like Itmar bin Gavir from a convict, a racist, bigoted convict, to a governmental post in which he will have authority over Palestinians. It's not inconsistent with ideas of ideas of tolerance. These are the same people who ignore what's happening to the Uyghurs in China and just signed a $30 billion deal with China, sending the clear message: it doesn't matter what you do to Muslims, and it doesn't matter the extent to which you malign Islam. We are indeed just like animals in the wilds, just like apes. As long as you feed us, and as long as you entertain us, we are mindless. We are empty up here. So as long as you throw peanuts our way, we will grab these peanuts and love you. Meanwhile, you can plot to imprison us. Meanwhile, you can plot to slaughter us. All that matters for us is that you threw us some peanuts. So we'll eat them and love you. This is exactly the dynamic that we witnessed with Jordan Peterson and his little theater with Hamza Yusuf and Muslims who praised Jordan Peterson. It was entirely predictable for those who actually have half a brain what Jordan Peterson was about from the very beginning. Look, recently, Allah teaches us through the unfolding of events all around us. Recently, Saudi Arabia put to death a 57-year-old man called Hussein Abu Khair. Hussein Abu Khair was accused of drug offenses. The problem, though, all the evidence used against Hussein Abu Khair that ultimately led to his execution was obtained after savage torture. The torture of Hussein Abu Khair, ultimately leading to his conviction and execution, was so horrible that in the human rights community, it is well-known fact, well-documented. But it was so horrible that a foreign office minister in Britain was so moved by the grotesque accounts of how he was tortured and the inadequacy of the evidence against him, that this minister in Britain, David Rutley, mentioned the abhorrent torture of Hussein Abu Khair before his execution. Saudi Arabia, like the country that has the Ministry of Tolerance, which, by the way, is headed by someone who is known to have raped a British journalist. These are the people that Bin Bayya and the admirers of you-know-who are fine with. David Rutley was forced, although the comments were made inside the British Parliament, he was forced to withdraw from the record the description of the torture that Hussein Abu Khair was received. He was forced to withdraw the word abhorrent. After Saudi Arabia exerted an enormous amount of pressure on the British government, the parliamentary record now reads, "We have already expressed our concern, particularly about Mr. Al-Khair's case, in which torture has been alleged, instead of who has been abhorrently tortured." Now, reflect on this for a second. Saudi Arabia, and like the Emirat, when the Prophet is insulted, they do nothing. When Islamophobia explodes in Germany, they do nothing. When Islamophobia is out of all control in the United States, they do nothing. When China perpetuates a genocide against Uyghur Muslims, they do nothing. When you have the Rohingyas, both at the international level and at the local level, they do nothing. But the same people who did the unprecedented act of naming an entire country, including our beloved Hijaz of Mecca and Medina, an entire country named after a completely marginal family, the Al Saud family, who used the wealth, Allah's given wealth of the Hijaz, which is the inheritance of the entire Muslim Ummah, to enrich themselves and enrich the persecutors of the Uyghurs and the persecutors of the Kashmiris, and all that. They are capable of exerting the type of pressure about things that they care about. They care about how the government of Saudi Arabia is described in the records of parliamentary discussions, but not when it comes to Islam and not when it comes to the Prophet. I go back to the feast, to the repast. In Surah Al-Maidah, Allah tells us, I am giving you a moral inheritance. A moral inheritance anchored on the idea of a covenant, a moral contract that binds you to your Maker, you to yourself, and you to your fellow human beings. And if you fail by forgetting what this moral contract means, you will be like nations of the past, wandering 40 years in an aimless desert, being reduced to the equivalent of apes and swine or pigs, being effectively morally vacuous, morally empty. The entire example of what we all witnessed with Jordan Peterson, culminating in his recent discussion with Netanyahu, is a terrifying comment in what we've done with Allah's repast, what Allah has given us to inherit. We remain an ignorant people that are easily tricked. We remain a people that easily jump up and down when peanuts are thrown our way, because we lack the intellectual acumen and the moral probity and the moral education to not follow in the footsteps and the path of the devil. اللهم اغفر لنا اللهم اعف عنا اللهم ارحمنا يا رب العالمين اللهم اهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا. Allah, forgive our sins, guide us يا رب العالمين to your path. Allah may allow us to be worthy of the repast that you have given us to inherit, because we have miserably failed and we are miserably failing. So aid us, Ya Rabbal Alameen, wa salli wa sallim wa barik ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa aqim as-salah.